I never thought at 70 years old I would be sitting in my kitchen with a gun in my lap at 3 in the morning. But life has a funny way of surprising you. My name is Sarah Thompson, and after 45 years of teaching high school English in rural Minnesota, I thought my retirement would be peaceful. The night my son-in-law broke into my home changed everything. What he found in my drawer that night shocked him, but what happened afterward would change our family forever. Before I begin my story, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and if you find this interesting, please subscribe to hear more stories from this grandmother who refused to be a victim. Teaching was never just a job for me. For 45 years, I poured my heart into that classroom at Pine Ridge High, watching generations of students grow into adults who would later send their own children to my English class. In our small Minnesota town of Lakefield, everyone knew Mrs. Thompson, the teacher who was tough, but fair, who believed in her students when no one else would. I retired 5 years ago, but former students still stop me at the grocery store to tell me about the books they are reading or the writing they do now. 3 years ago, my husband Thomas passed away suddenly from heart failure. We had been married for 42 years, and the morning I found him unresponsive in his favorite armchair, with his glasses still perched on his nose, and the newspaper in his lap. Something in me broke. Thomas had been my rock, my confidant, my best friend since we were 23. He left me financially secure, with a paid-off home, a modest retirement fund, and his collection of antique guns that had been his pride and joy, safely locked in a heavy steel safe in our basement. Our only daughter Judy had always been headstrong, a trait that sometimes made us butt heads during her teenage years. She married Derek Hamilton right after college despite my reservations. There was something about Derek I never trusted, a slickness to him, a way his eyes never quite met mine when he spoke. But Judy was in love, and Thomas always said we had to let her make her own choices, even the difficult ones. The first few years of their marriage seemed fine on the surface. Judy worked as an accountant while Derek bounced between sales jobs, never quite finding his footing, but always talking about the next big opportunity. They gave us our only grandchild, Ethan, who is now 10 years old, and the absolute light of my life. That boy has Thomas's gentle eyes and curious mind, always asking questions about how things work and why the world is the way it is. It was about 2 years ago when I started noticing changes in Judy. Her phone calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, she seemed distracted, anxious. When they visited, I noticed she would tense up when Derek would check his phone, which he did constantly. Judy started looking tired, wearing long sleeves even in summer, and brushing off my concerned questions with forced smiles and quick subject changes. I discovered Derek's gambling problem by accident. I had gone to drop off a birthday gift for Ethan at their house, while Judy was at work using the spare key she had given me years ago. Derek was supposedly at a job interview. Instead, I found him in their home office on the phone, frantically trying to borrow money from someone, mentioning horses and cards and a debt that needed to be paid by Friday, or there would be trouble. When he saw me, he hung up quickly and fed me some story about an investment opportunity, but I had taught teenagers long enough to recognize a lie when I heard one. After Thomas died, I stayed in our family home alone, despite Judy suggesting I sell it and move into a senior community. This house held 40 years of memories, from the height marks on the kitchen doorframe, tracking Judy's growth, to the garden Thomas had lovingly tended each spring. Plus, I was still perfectly capable of caring for myself and my home. I might be 70, but I still walked 3 miles every morning and volunteered at the library twice a week. My grandson Ethan would stay with me every other weekend, a tradition that started after Thomas died. During those weekends, we would bake cookies, work in the garden, and read together in the big armchair that still held the impression of Thomas's body. Sometimes Ethan would ask about the locked gun safe in the basement, curious about his grandfather's collection, but I always explained that those were not toys and would only be opened when he was much older. The first real warning sign came 3 months ago, when Judy called asking if I would consider helping them with what she called a temporary financial setback. I had always been willing to help with Ethan's education fund or genuine emergencies, but something in her voice made me hesitate. When I gently probed for more details, she became evasive, then irritated. I could hear Derek in the background, his voice tense as he asked if I had agreed yet. When I suggested that perhaps they should speak with a financial advisor instead, Judy quickly ended the call. That night, I moved Thomas's prized pocket watch and my mother's jewelry from my bedroom into the safe in the basement, my instincts telling me something wasn't right. Just 1 week before the incident, Judy brought Derek and Ethan for Sunday dinner. Throughout the meal, Derek kept steering the conversation toward my financial situation, asking pointed questions about my retirement accounts and whether Thomas had left me well off. Most concerning was his sudden interest in Thomas's gun collection, asking where I kept the safe and whether the guns might be valuable to collectors. I deflected his questions, but later that evening I noticed Derek had disappeared for nearly 15 minutes. When he returned to the living room, he claimed he had been using the bathroom, but his eyes darted around nervously. That night after they left, I checked my bedroom and noticed my nightstand drawer had been disturbed, though nothing was missing. The drawer contained old reading glasses, a flashlight, and a ring of keys, one of which opened the gun safe. That night, I moved the safe keys to a new location and placed something else in that drawer, something that would later prove to be much more valuable than any key. The day before Derek broke into my home started like any other Tuesday. I woke at 6, made a cup of strong black coffee, and sat on my back porch, watching the early summer sun climb over Mrs. Winslow's maple trees next door. I spent the morning tending to my vegetable garden, then drove to the grocery store to pick up ingredients for Ethan's favorite chocolate chip cookies. He was supposed to come stay with me that weekend, and I always like to have fresh cookies waiting for him. The kitchen filled with the sweet scent of vanilla and chocolate, as I baked that afternoon, the familiar routine soothing my nerves. I had been feeling uneasy since that Sunday dinner, a persistent worry gnawing at the edges of my mind. After 45 years of teaching, I had developed a sort of sixth sense about when something was wrong, the same instinct that told me which student was in trouble before they even raised their hand. The phone rang just as I was taking the last batch of cookies from the oven. It was Judy, her voice tight, with that forced brightness I had come to recognize as a mask for stress. Would it be possible to drop Ethan off a day early on Thursday instead of Friday? Derek had an unexpected business opportunity out of town, she explained. Of course, I agreed immediately, always happy for extra time with my grandson. As we chatted about Ethan's recent science project, I heard Derek's voice in the background growing louder, more insistent. I couldn't make out all the words, but one phrase came through, clearly sending a chill down my spine. The old lady must have it somewhere. There was a shuffling sound, then Judy quickly said she had to go, the line going dead before I could respond. I stood in my sunny kitchen, the phone still in my hand, feeling suddenly cold despite the warmth from the oven. Old lady. That's what Derek called me when he thought I couldn't hear. Never to my face, of course. It. What was it? The safe keys, the combination, or something else entirely? That evening, instead of watching my usual mystery shows, I methodically went through the house, checking each window lock, each door. I moved Thomas's pocket watch and my jewelry from the safe in the basement to a small lockbox hidden in the attic underneath boxes of Christmas decorations. I withdrew $500 from the emergency cash I kept in the safe and tucked it into an envelope inside a cookbook in the kitchen. Then I went to the drawer in my nightstand, the one Derek had been so interested in. I removed the spare set of safe keys and placed them inside a hollowed-out book in the living room bookshelf. In their place, I put 3 items: a small digital voice recorder Thomas had used for taking notes, on his nature walks a manila envelope containing printouts of online gambling sites I had found in Derek's search history after borrowing Judy's laptop to look up a recipe, and a handwritten note that simply read, "I knew you would come, Derek." I turned on the voice recorder before placing it in the drawer. Old teacher habits die hard, and one thing I had learned over decades in the classroom was the importance of documentation. The last thing I did before bed was take Thomas's old revolver from the gun safe in the basement. Thomas had insisted on teaching me to shoot years ago, concerned about me being alone in the house when he traveled for work. I had protested at first, but eventually agreed, spending several weekends at the shooting range until I could hit a target consistently. The gun had remained locked away since his death, but that night I carefully loaded it and placed it in the drawer of the guest room nightstand, where I decided to sleep instead of in my own bedroom. As I prepared for bed, my phone rang again. It was Ethan, his small voice, wavering as he asked if he could still come stay with me on Thursday. In the background, I could hear raised voices, Derek's angry tone, and Judy's attempts to calm him. "Yes, of course you can, sweetheart," I assured him, my heart aching at the worry in his young voice. We talked about the cookies I'd baked and the new bird feeder we could set up together, anything to distract him from whatever was happening in his home. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the springs creaking under my weight. I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, praying. Not the formal prayers of my childhood church, but a simple plea for protection and wisdom, for Judy, for Ethan, even despite everything for Derek. Before turning out the light, I took one last thing from my teacher days out of my purse, a small canister of pepper spray I had carried since a student's angry father had threatened me during a conference 20 years ago. I had never needed to use it, but I placed it on the nightstand beside me next to my reading glasses and a glass of water. I expected to lie awake, my mind racing with worries, but exhaustion claimed me quickly. My last conscious thought was of Thomas wondering what he would do in my situation, and hoping I had his strength to face whatever was coming. The shattering of glass jolted me from a dreamless sleep. For a moment I lay perfectly still in the unfamiliar guest room, my heart pounding as I tried to orient myself. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 in glowing red numbers. Another sound from downstairs. A soft curse confirmed what my racing heart already knew: someone was in my house. Years of handling classroom emergencies had taught me to think clearly under pressure. I reached for my phone with one hand and Thomas's revolver with the other, moving with a deliberate calm that surprised even me. The weight of the gun was foreign yet familiar, in my palm a connection to Thomas that steadied my nerves. I slipped out of bed, grateful for the guest room's carpeted floor that muffled my footsteps. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the nightlight I kept plugged in near the bathroom for when Ethan visited. I moved like a shadow down the hallway, each step careful, and measured the gun pointed safely down as Thomas had taught me. From the top of the stairs, I could hear movement in the living room, the sound of furniture being shifted, cushions being overturned. Then a voice, unmistakably Derek's, muttering to himself. "Where are those damn safe keys? The old lady must keep them somewhere accessible." I eased down the first few steps, stopping when the third stair creaked beneath my weight. Derek fell silent for a moment, then resumed his search, apparently dismissing the sound. I continued my descent, keeping close to the wall where the stairs were less likely to announce my presence. From my new vantage point, I could see into the living room. Derek was illuminated by the beam of a flashlight he held between his teeth as he rifled through my desk drawers. He wore dark clothes and gloves like a character from one of the crime shows I enjoyed watching. The irony might have made me laugh under different circumstances. I watched as he moved methodically through the room, growing increasingly agitated as his search proved fruitless. He kicked over a small side table in frustration, sending my collection of framed photos crashing to the floor. I winced at the sound of breaking glass but remained still unseen in the shadows of the stairwell. Derek pulled a phone from his pocket, the screen illuminating his face with an eerie blue glow. He dialed a number, turning away from my direction as he spoke in hushed tones. "I'm at the old lady's house now," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "No, I haven't found it yet, but I will. She's got to have those keys somewhere, probably in her bedroom. Once I get into the safe, we'll have enough cash to cover everything, plus those antique guns will fetch a good price." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end of the call. "Don't tell Judy," he continued, a new edge to his voice. "She doesn't need to know about this. I told her I was meeting with a potential investor tonight. By morning I'll have the money pay off Marcus and she'll never have to know where it came from." The confirmation that my daughter wasn't involved in this scheme brought a small measure of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by the reality of my situation. My son-in-law was robbing me to pay off what sounded like gambling debts, and he was heading toward my bedroom where he expected to find me sleeping. I retreated silently up the stairs and took position in the kitchen, which offered a clear view of both the hallway leading to my bedroom and the living room. The layout of my home, which Thomas had always said was poorly designed with its awkward angles and unexpected doorways, now offered me a strategic advantage. As Derek made his way toward the bedroom flashlight bobbing in the darkness, I dialed 911 on my phone, keeping my voice to the barest whisper as I reported a break-in in progress at my address. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way but urged me to find a safe place to hide until they arrived. Hide, I almost laughed out loud. I had spent 45 years standing my ground in front of classrooms, filled with teenagers, who sometimes towered over my 5'3" frame. I had faced down angry parents, disruptive students, and one memorable occasion, a young man high on drugs who had wandered into my classroom. Hiding had never been my style. Instead, I positioned myself where I could observe, without being seen, the gun steady in my hands, my breathing slow and controlled. As I waited, my mind drifted briefly to my former students who had faced difficult home situations, the ones who came to school with secrets in their eyes and burdens on their young shoulders. I had taught them that running away solved nothing, that facing problems head-on was the only way through them. Now it was time to take my own advice. From my position, I could hear Derek entering my bedroom, the sound of drawers being opened and closed with increasing force. I knew exactly what he was looking for and exactly what he would find instead. The evidence I had carefully prepared was about to serve its purpose. I considered confronting him immediately, but decided against it. Better to let him find my little surprise first, to have concrete evidence of his intentions. Besides, the police were on their way. All I needed to do was keep him in the house until they arrived. I allowed myself a small, grim smile in the darkness. Derek had severely underestimated this old lady. He was about to learn a lesson far more valuable than anything I had ever taught in a classroom. I could hear Derek moving around my bedroom, the sounds of frustration growing, as drawers were yanked open, contents spilled onto the floor. The beam of his flashlight danced across the walls, visible through the doorway from my vantage point in the kitchen. I checked my phone silently, the muted screen, telling me 8 minutes had passed since I called the police. In our small town, response time was usually under 15 minutes even at this hour. "Come on, where are they?" Derek muttered, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet house. "The old lady's got to keep them somewhere close." The beam of light settled on my nightstand, and I heard the distinctive squeak of the top drawer being pulled open. There was a moment of silence then, a confused noise. "What the hell is this?" I could picture him perfectly, holding the voice recorder in his gloved hand, puzzled by finding it instead of the keys he sought. Then the rustle of paper as he discovered the manila envelope. A prolonged silence followed, broken only by the sound of papers being shuffled. I could almost feel the moment realization dawned on him, could almost see his face paling in the darkness as he understood what the documents meant. I had been collecting evidence of his gambling activities for months. Printouts of websites, records of late-night calls, notes from conversations overheard. Then the final blow. I knew he had found my handwritten note when he let out a strangled curse. "I knew you would come, Derek." 5 simple words that told him this was no coincidence, that he had walked directly into a trap set by someone he had grievously underestimated. The time for hiding was over. I stepped into the doorway of my bedroom. Thomas's revolver, held firmly in both hands, pointed at the floor but ready to be raised if necessary. I reached for the light switch with one elbow and flooded the room with sudden brightness. Derek stood frozen beside my bed, the note in one hand, the manila envelope in the other, the voice recorder on the nightstand, still silently documenting everything. He squinted against the sudden light, his face a mask of shock and anger when he recognized me. "Looking for something, Derek?" I asked, my voice steadier than I would have thought possible. He recovered quickly, his expression shifting to the smooth, charming smile he had perfected over years of sales jobs and broken promises. "Sarah," he said, as if we were meeting for coffee instead of a middle-of-the-night burglary. "This isn't what it looks like. I was just checking on you, making sure you were safe." With gloves on, I noted my gaze pointedly taking in his dark clothing and the small crowbar protruding from his pocket, and after breaking my living room window, "How thoughtful of you." His smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. His eyes darted from my face to the gun in my hands, calculating his options. You wouldn't shoot me, he said, but doubt crept into his voice. I'm family. I've been gathering evidence for months, Derek. I replied calmly, nodding toward the papers in his hand. Every time you mentioned Thomas's guns, every time you asked about my finances, every time you disappeared during family visits to snoop through my things. Did you think I wouldn't notice I taught high school for 45 years? I can spot someone up to no good from a mile away. He took a step toward me, his body language shifting from defensive to aggressive. I raised the gun slightly, not pointing it at him directly, but making it clear I was prepared to use it if necessary. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Sarah, he snarled, his charming facade completely gone now. I owe people, dangerous people. I need that money tonight. And you thought robbing your wife's mother was the solution. I shook my head, genuine sadness mixing with my anger. What would Judy think if she knew you were here? What would Ethan think? At the mention of my grandson, something flickered in Derek's eyes, a brief flash of shame quickly buried under renewed anger. They'll never know, he said flatly. You're going to give me the keys to that safe and we're going to forget this ever happened. I almost laughed at his continued delusion that he held any power in this situation. I moved the safe 2 days ago. I informed him, taking pleasure in watching his face fall. After you were so interested in it during dinner Sunday night, I had a security company come and relocate it. It's not even in this house anymore. That was a lie, but he had no way of knowing that. The safe was still in the basement, but the keys were indeed elsewhere, and the combination had been changed the day after our Sunday dinner. You're lying, he snapped, taking another step toward me. The contents of that envelope suggest I'm not the liar in this room, I replied evenly. I shifted my weight slightly, making sure I was blocking the doorway completely. In the distance, I thought I could hear sirens, but it might have been wishful thinking. Derek's face contorted with fury. Give me the keys, Sarah, now. He lunged forward, reaching for the gun. Without hesitation, I stepped to the side and fired a single shot into the ceiling, the report deafening, in the confined space of the bedroom. Plaster dust rained down on us both as Derek froze mid-stride, his face transformed by shock. The next shot won't be into the ceiling, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Now, back up and sit down on that bed until the police arrive. Police, he whispered, the blood draining from his face. As if on cue, the unmistakable wail of sirens became audible, growing louder by the second. They should be here in about 2 minutes. I told him, my teacher voice firmly in place, the one I had used when sending particularly troublesome students to the principal's office. I called them before I came upstairs. Did you really think I would confront a burglar without backup? Derek sank onto the edge of my bed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. In that moment, he looked less like the confident, swaggering man who had married my daughter, and more like the frightened boys I had counseled in my office over the years, the ones who had made terrible choices and were only now realizing the consequences. It's over, Derek, I said, not unkindly. The game, the lies, all of it. It's time to face what you've done. The flash of police lights illuminated my bedroom window blue and red, painting the walls in rhythmic pulses. Derek buried his face in his hands, the papers from the manila envelope scattered around his feet like fallen leaves, each one a documented step in his path to this moment. I kept the gun trained on him until I heard the front door burst open, until uniformed officers filled my bedroom with shouted commands and controlled chaos. Only then did I lower Thomas's revolver. Only then did I allow my hands to tremble, the adrenaline that had kept me clear-headed and focused, finally giving way to the reality of what had just transpired in my quiet suburban home. As the officers handcuffed Derek and led him away, one of them, a young man who looked barely older than my former students, asked if I was hurt. No, I told him, suddenly feeling every one of my 70 years. Not physically, anyway. The red and blue lights of police cars turned my quiet street into a surreal light show. Neighbors in hastily donned bathrobes clustered on their front lawns, watching with undisguised curiosity as Derek was placed in the back of a patrol car. I sat at my kitchen table, a blanket around my shoulders provided by a female officer who kept calling me ma'am in a gentle voice that made me feel ancient. I had just finished giving my statement showing the officers the voice recorder with Derek's incriminating comments, the collection of evidence I had gathered, the broken window in the living room. The revolver had been taken as evidence, which saddened me more than it should have. It had been Thomas's favorite, a connection to him I had treasured, even though I rarely opened the safe. It was nearing 5 in the morning when a car screeched to a halt in front of my house. Judy burst through the front door moments later, her face ashen hair, uncombed, wearing mismatched clothes as if she had dressed in the dark. "Mom!" she cried out, her voice breaking as she took in the scene. Police officers filling out reports, the broken glass being photographed, the general disarray of her childhood home. What happened? They said Derek was arrested for breaking in, but that can't be right. There must be some mistake. The female officer looked at me questioningly, and I nodded silently, asking for a moment alone with my daughter. The officer guided her colleagues to the porch, giving us privacy in the kitchen. "Sit down, Judy," I said gently, pulling out a chair for her at the table where she had done homework as a child, where we had shared countless meals as a family. "No, I don't want to sit down," she shouted, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I want you to tell me why my husband is in a police car." I had faced angry parents before, had delivered difficult news to countless families over my teaching career, but nothing had prepared me for the pain of what I now had to tell my only child. "Derek broke into my house tonight looking for the keys to your father's gun safe." I began, keeping my voice calm and factual. "He intended to steal the guns and whatever cash I had. He admitted he needed money to pay off gambling debts." Judy shook her head violently, backing away from me as if my words were physical blows. "No, that's not possible. Derek doesn't gamble. He's been working so hard on a new business deal. He left tonight to meet with investors." I reached for the voice recorder that the police had returned to me after making their own copy of its contents. I pressed play, and Derek's voice filled the kitchen, his words, from the phone call he had made during the break, in clear and damning. "I'm at the old lady's house now. Once I get into the safe, we'll have enough cash to cover everything, plus those antique guns will fetch a good price. Don't tell Judy, she doesn't need to know about this." Judy's face crumpled as the recording continued, Derek's voice detailing his plans, mentioning someone named Marcus, who had to be paid off, threatening what would happen if I didn't cooperate. By the time I stopped the playback, she had collapsed into a kitchen chair, silent tears streaming down her face. "I have other recordings too," I told her quietly, from Sunday dinner, when he was asking about the safe, from phone calls where he thought I couldn't hear him in the background. "I've suspected for months, Judy. I just didn't want to believe it." "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. "Or would you have thought I was interfering, being the critical mother-in-law?" She had no answer for that, her silence confirmation enough. We sat in the quiet kitchen as dawn began to lighten the sky outside, the weight of unspoken truths heavy between us. Our painful conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the front door. Mrs. Winslow, my next-door neighbor, stood on the porch with Ethan beside her, his small face pinched with worry, clutching his backpack. "He came to my door about 20 minutes ago," she explained apologetically. "Said he walked from your house, Judy. He was worried about his grandma after seeing the police cars." Ethan rushed past her into the house, flinging himself into my arms with such force that I nearly toppled backwards. "Grandma," he cried, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "Are you okay? I saw Dad's car, and then the police, and I got scared." I held him tightly, this precious boy, who had somehow made his way through the early morning darkness to check on me. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured him, smoothing his tousled hair. "Just a little excitement for an old lady." Over his head, I met Judy's devastated gaze, watching, as she realized her 10-year-old son had witnessed the aftermath of her husband's arrest. The complexities of what lay ahead began to unfold before us, the legal proceedings against Derek just the beginning of our family's ordeal. The next few days passed in a blur of police interviews, hushed phone calls, and explanations, too carefully worded for a child's ears. My home, once my sanctuary, now felt violated, the broken window boarded up but still a visible reminder of that night. Crime scene tape marked off areas of my bedroom where evidence had been collected, and I found myself sleeping in the guest room not by choice, but by necessity. Word spread quickly through our small town. Former students, many now adults with children of their own, appeared on my doorstep with casseroles and concerned faces. My phone rang constantly with calls from friends and colleagues offering support or less kindly fishing for gossip about the teacher whose son-in-law had tried to rob her at gunpoint. The story grew with each telling details embellished and twisted until I hardly recognized the events of that night. Derek was denied bail due to the nature of the charges and the evidence against him. His gambling associate, sensing blood in the water, began calling Judy demanding money she didn't have, making thinly veiled threats. One even showed up at her house pounding on the door until a neighbor called the police. After that incident, I insisted Judy and Ethan move in with me. They took the 2 bedrooms upstairs, leaving me the guest room I had already been using. Our new living arrangement was awkward at first, both of us tiptoeing around each other's feelings, careful not to say Derek's name in front of Ethan. The legal process ground forward with excruciating slowness. Derek was charged with breaking and entering attempted armed robbery and a host of lesser offenses. Each development brought fresh pain to Judy, who alternated between defending him and cursing his name sometimes within the same conversation. Ethan began having nightmares, waking up, crying for his father. During the day, he would stick close to me as if afraid I might disappear if he let me out of his sight. The child psychologist we consulted explained that Ethan was processing trauma the only way he knew how, by clinging to the adults who remained constant in his life. The financial toll became apparent as Judy sorted through their accounts, discovering Derek had remortgaged their house without her knowledge, maxed out credit cards in both their names, and even taken loans against Ethan's college fund. The extent of his gambling addiction was far worse than any of us had imagined, a web of deceit and debt that threatened to entangle all of us. Through it all, I tried to be the steady presence my family needed, the rock that Thomas had always been for us. But in quiet moments, when Judy and Ethan were asleep upstairs, I would sit in Thomas's old armchair and allow myself to feel the full weight of what had happened, the violation of my home, and trust the shattering of my daughter's life, the loss of innocence for my grandson. It was during one of these moments, about 3 weeks after the break-in, that Judy found me. She sat on the arm of the chair, much as she had done as a teenager, when she wanted to talk about something important. "I'm filing for divorce," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance. "I've contacted a lawyer." I took her hand in mine, noting how much it resembled my own at her age, the same long fingers and prominent knuckles. "Are you sure?" I asked, not because I disagreed, but because I needed to know she had thought it through. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes but not falling. "I've been thinking about it ever since that night, going over everything, all the signs I missed or ignored. The late nights, the unexplained withdrawals from our accounts, the way he would get defensive if I asked questions." She took a shuddering breath. "I enabled him, Mom. I believed every lie because it was easier than facing the truth." "That's not your fault," I began, but she cut me off with a shake of her head. "Part of it is," she insisted. "I chose not to see what was happening. I let him isolate me from you and from my friends. I made excuses for his behavior even to myself." She looked at me directly, then her eyes clear despite the tears. "But I'm done with that now. Ethan deserves better. I deserve better." In that moment, I saw not just my daughter, but glimpses of the woman she could become, stronger and wiser for having walked through fire. The road ahead would not be easy for any of us, but for the first time since that terrible night, I felt a flicker of hope that we might eventually find our way to something better. 3 months after the night Derek broke into my home, the gentle rhythm of a new normal had begun to take shape. The kitchen table where I had once sat alone with my morning coffee now hosted 3-place settings, the daily chaos of getting Ethan ready for school, bringing a vibrancy to the old house that had been missing since Thomas passed away. Judy had officially filed for divorce, a process complicated by Derek's incarceration as he awaited trial. The house she had shared with Derek was in foreclosure, another devastating discovery in the aftermath of his arrest. Years of secret gambling had left a financial wasteland that we were only beginning to map the full extent of. We had started attending family therapy sessions twice a week, Judy, Ethan, and myself sitting in a cozy office with Dr. Brennan, a gentle-voiced woman with silver-streaked hair who specialized in trauma and addiction issues. It was during these sessions that the most difficult truths emerged layer by painful layer. The gambling was only the most visible symptom of Derek's problems, Judy revealed during one particularly gut-wrenching session. For years, he had been emotionally manipulating her, isolating her from friends and family, controlling their finances, while creating an illusion of shared decision-making. When things went wrong, which they increasingly did as his gambling spiraled, he would blame her, convincing her that his actions were responses to her failings as a wife. Classic gaslighting. Dr. Brennan had explained, her kind eyes on Judy as my daughter sobbed through this revelation. He needed you to doubt your own perceptions so you wouldn't question his behavior. I sat listening, my heart breaking anew as I realized how blind I had been to my own daughter's suffering. I had noticed her withdrawal, her increasing anxiety, the way she would check with Derek before answering even simple questions, but I had attributed it to normal marital stress, not recognizing the signs of emotional abuse that had been right in front of me. Ethan's therapy sessions revealed their own painful truths. He had been aware of far more than either Judy or I had realized, picking up on the tension at home, overhearing arguments about money, sensing his father's growing desperation. His nightmares, we learned, had started long before the break-in, populated by shadowy figures coming to take away his home, his toys, his parents. Money had grown tight with Judy's income, now supporting all three of us. My retirement savings were comfortable, but not unlimited, especially with the added expenses of therapy and legal fees. After much consideration, I made a decision that surprised even me. I'm going back to teaching. I announced one evening as the three of us sat at the kitchen table doing homework. Ethan, with his 5th grade math, Judy, with paperwork from the divorce lawyer, me with a crossword puzzle. Both looked up, startled. "But Mom, you're retired," Judy protested. "You're 70 years old." "Only as a substitute," I clarified, smiling at their surprised faces. 3 days a week. Principal Morris called me yesterday, said they're desperate for qualified subs, especially in English. The extra income will help, and... I hesitated, then admitted the truth. It will be good for me to get out of the house to feel useful again. The next morning, I called Principal Morris back and accepted his offer. By the following week, I was back in a classroom, the familiar environment both comforting and energizing. Many of my colleagues were former students, now teachers themselves, who welcomed me with open arms and tactful avoidance of gossip about my family situation. Word of my return to teaching spread quickly, and with it came an unexpected wave of support from the community. Former students, now adults with careers and families of their own, reached out with messages of encouragement. Some stopped by the school to visit, bringing coffee or homemade treats, sharing stories of how my classes had influenced their lives. Jennifer Alderson, now a successful attorney in Minneapolis, who had once been a shy girl, afraid to raise her hand in class, sent a substantial check to help with Ethan's therapy expenses. Michael Reeves, who had struggled with reading until I spent countless lunch hours working with him, now owned the local hardware store and offered Judy a part-time job with flexible hours that would work around Ethan's school schedule. The support was overwhelming and humbling, a reminder that the seeds we plant throughout our lives can bear fruit in ways we never anticipate. Derek, meanwhile, continued his attempts to manipulate from jail. His calls to Judy grew increasingly desperate as his trial date approached and the evidence against him mounted. He would swing from tearful apologies to angry accusations, from promises of change to subtle threats about what would happen if she testified against him. It was Dr. Brennan who suggested we study these manipulation techniques together, breaking down his patterns of behavior in therapy sessions so Judy could recognize them for what they were. We made a chart on a large piece of poster board, listing tactics like minimizing, "It wasn't that bad," gaslighting that never happened, "You're imagining things," guilt trips, "How could you do this to me after everything I've done for you," and false promises, "This time will be different, I swear." The exercise was painful but illuminating. Seeing these tactics written out in black and white helped Judy recognize how long they had been part of her marriage, how thoroughly they had eroded her sense of self. 4 months after the break-in, Derek requested a meeting with Judy at the county jail. Dr. Brennan thought it might provide closure if Judy felt strong enough to face him. I drove her there myself, waiting in the visitors area, while she spoke with him through the glass partition. She emerged 30 minutes later, her face tear-streaked, but her posture straighter, more confident than I had seen in years. "He tried every trick on our chart," she said with a sad smile as we walked to the car. "Every single one. And for the first time I saw them for what they were. I told him the divorce would proceed whether he agreed or not, and that I would be testifying truthfully at his trial." That night, after Ethan was asleep, she and I sat on the back porch with cups of tea watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. "Do you want to know what the safe actually had in it?" I asked her, breaking a comfortable silence. She looked surprised. "I guess I never thought about it. What was in it that Derek wanted so badly?" I smiled, taking a sip of tea before answering. "Your father's antique guns, which were valuable but not nearly as much as Derek seemed to think. About $3,000 in cash for emergencies. And a collection of family heirlooms." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "Your grandmother's pearls, which I was saving to give you on your 10th anniversary. That would have been next month." I handed her the pouch, watching as she opened it and let the strand of creamy pearls pool in her palm, catching the soft porch light. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "They're yours," I told her. "Not as an anniversary gift anymore, but as a new beginning gift. Your grandmother wore them when she left Ireland to start a new life here. They've always symbolized courage to me." She fastened them around her neck with trembling fingers, then looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of Thomas. It made my heart ache. "I'm scared, Mom," she admitted. "I don't know how to start over at 38. I took her hand, noting how much stronger her grip felt than it had just months before. "None of us know how to start over," I told her. "We just do it anyway, one day at a time. And you won't be doing it alone." As if to underline my point, Ethan's voice called from the screen door, asking if he could join us. He climbed into his mother's lap despite being almost too big for such things, and the three of us sat together in the gathering darkness, a broken family, slowly finding a way to become whole again in a new configuration. The next day, Judy received an unexpected call from James Wilson, the high school principal, and my former colleague. They needed an administrative assistant in the front office, a position that would start when school resumed in the fall. Would she be interested in interviewing? She accepted the interview, and later the job, with a tentative hope that reminded me of springtime after a particularly harsh winter. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps Thomas had been watching over us, after all, guiding us toward this new chapter we had never anticipated, but were learning to embrace. 1 year after the night that changed everything, I stood in my kitchen preparing a special dinner. The calendar on the wall, marked with therapy appointments, work schedules, and Ethan's baseball games, showed today's date circled in red. It wasn't a traditional anniversary worth celebrating, but it marked an important milestone for our unconventional household. That morning, we had attended Derek's sentencing hearing. After months of legal maneuvering, he had eventually accepted a plea deal, admitting to breaking and entering attempted robbery and a host of financial crimes that had come to light during the investigation. The judge had sentenced him to 8 years, with possibility of parole after 5. Watching him being led away in handcuffs had been difficult despite everything. Not because I felt sympathy for him particularly, but because of the pain etched on Ethan's face as he watched his father disappear through the courtroom door. No matter what Derek had done, he was still Ethan's dad, and that complicated reality was something we were all still learning to navigate. But tonight wasn't about Derek. It was about acknowledging how far we had come, the three of us, in rebuilding our lives from the wreckage he had left behind. Judy entered the kitchen carrying a small cake from the bakery downtown, Ethan trailing behind her with a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the meadow behind the school. At 11, he was growing tall, his features maturing, looking more like Thomas every day in the shape of his eyes and the determined set of his jaw. "Happy rebirthday, Mom," Judy said, setting the cake on the counter and giving me a quick hug. The term had become our private joke, a way of marking this strange anniversary as something positive rather than traumatic. Dinner was a cheerful affair, the three of us sharing stories from our day. Judy talked about the upcoming school year, and her promotion to full-time administrative coordinator, a position created specifically for her after she had streamlined several office processes during her first year. Ethan chatted excitedly about baseball tryouts and a science project on renewable energy. I shared an anecdote about a former student who had stopped me in the grocery store to tell me he had named his daughter after me. As we ate the cake, which had "Congratulations on your new life" written in blue frosting, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in 12 months. The most visible changes were practical ones. Judy had completed her divorce and legally returned to her maiden name Thompson, which Ethan had also taken his decision, made after careful consideration and several discussions with his therapist. We had settled into a comfortable routine in the house, the three generations finding ways to accommodate each other's needs for privacy and togetherness. Financially, we were stable, if not wealthy. My substitute teaching had expanded to 4 days a week, with an additional role as a mentor for new teachers that I particularly enjoyed. Judy's position at the school provided steady income and benefits, and we had managed to set up a new college fund for Ethan to replace the one Derek had drained. But the most profound changes were the invisible ones, the shifts in our hearts and minds that had occurred gradually over months of therapy, difficult conversations, and shared tears and laughter. For Judy, it had been finding her voice again after years of having it silenced. Watching her grow more confident, making decisions without second-guessing herself, standing up for herself in difficult situations, had been like witnessing a flower unfurling after a long winter. She had even started dating recently, a development that filled me with both happiness and protective concern. For Ethan, the changes were more complex. He still struggled with anger toward his father, with confusion about his conflicting feelings of love and betrayal. But he was learning healthy ways to express those emotions, channeling his energy into sports and school, talking openly in therapy, writing in the journal Dr. Brennan had suggested. His nightmares had become less frequent, and his smile when it appeared no longer seemed forced. And for me, the changes had been unexpected but profound. At 71, I had discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed, had found purpose in helping my family rebuild, while also rediscovering my passion for teaching. The trauma of that night had left its mark, certainly moments of anxiety that would still catch me unawares, a heightened alertness to sounds in the night. But it had also given me a fierce appreciation for the present moment, for the family that remained, and the community that had rallied around us. After dinner, as Judy cleared the dishes and Ethan disappeared upstairs to finish homework, I stepped out onto the back porch, drawn by the golden light of the setting Sunday. The garden Thomas had loved was flourishing again, tended now by both Ethan and me on weekend mornings, a tradition we had established that connected us to Thomas's memory while creating new bonds between us. I thought about the lessons this difficult year had taught us, lessons I wished we could have learned in gentler ways but that were valuable nonetheless. The importance of trusting one's instincts, of preparing for difficulties rather than pretending they don't exist. The power of community support in times of crisis. The complex nature of addiction and how it can transform someone into a person their loved ones no longer recognize. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to start over, to rebuild from ashes, to find new purpose and joy even after devastating loss. At an age when many of my contemporaries were slowing down, I had been forced to summon energy and courage I didn't know I still possessed. 6 months after the break-in, I had started a support group for families affected by gambling addiction, drawing on our experience to help others navigate similar crises. The group met twice monthly in the church basement, a safe space for sharing stories and resources. What had begun with just 3 participants had grown to over 20, from teenagers to elderly spouses, all seeking understanding and strength from each other's experiences. Our neighborhood had established a community watch program with regular meetings and a phone tree for emergencies. I had installed a state-of-the-art security system in our home, with cameras that sent alerts to our phones and panic buttons in every room. These practical measures brought peace of mind, but the real security came from the knowledge that we were surrounded by people who cared, who would respond if needed. Perhaps the most difficult lesson had been about the nature of forgiveness, a concept I had wrestled with throughout this year. Not forgiveness for Derek, I wasn't there yet, and wasn't sure I ever would be, but forgiveness for myself. For not seeing the signs of abuse sooner, for not protecting my daughter better. For the moments of anger and resentment that sometimes still surfaced, despite my best intentions. Doctor. Brennan had helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting or excusing, that it was possible to set firm boundaries while still releasing the burden of hatred, that true forgiveness was a gift I gave myself rather than the person who had harmed me. I was still working on that lesson, as was Judy, as was Ethan. It was a process, not a destination, much like the grief I still felt for Thomas present, but changing shape over time, becoming something I could carry, without being crushed by its weight. The screen door creaked open behind me, and Judy stepped out onto the porch, handing me a fresh cup of tea. She sat beside me on the swing Thomas had built decades ago, and we rocked gently in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "You know what I was thinking about today at the courthouse?" she asked finally. "What's that?" I replied, sipping my tea. "How easy it would have been for this story to have a different ending. If you hadn't trusted your instincts, if you hadn't prepared." She let the thought trail off, but I knew what she meant. The alternatives were too painful to articulate fully. I squeezed her hand. "But it didn't end that way," I reminded her gently. "We're still here. We're still standing. Because of you, Mom." She looked at me with those eyes so like her father's. "Your strength saved us all." I shook my head, thinking of all the moments I had felt anything but strong over this past year. "Not just me," I corrected her. "All of us together. That's the most important lesson in all of this. We're stronger together than we are alone." As twilight deepened around us, I thought about the long road we had traveled and the journey still ahead. There would be more challenges, certainly. Ethan's adolescence, Judy's continuing recovery from emotional abuse, my own aging and eventual decline. Life offered no guarantees of smooth sailing. But sitting there on the porch, swing with my daughter, hearing my grandson's footsteps overhead, feeling the gentle evening breeze against my face, I was filled with a profound sense of gratitude and hope. We had survived, the worst storm had found our way to calmer waters. Whatever came next, we would face it together, 3 generations of Thompson resilience. Have you ever had to completely rebuild your life after a betrayal or crisis? What gave you the strength to start over? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences from someone who's learned that it's never too late for a new beginning. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope, please share this video with them. Thank you for spending this time with me, and remember, our greatest strength often emerges from our deepest challenges. Until next time, this is Sarah Thompson wishing you courage on your own journey.